Princess Diana ever discuss him?
Yes, very fondly, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
When you look back, was there one particular time when you and Princess Diana just had a ball together?
There's a photograph that most people have seen, but very few truly understand. It was taken in July 1997 at a cathedral in Milan, and it shows Princess Diana leaning gently toward a grieving Elton John, her hand resting on his shoulder during the funeral of their mutual friend Gianni Versace. The world looked at that image and saw a princess comforting a pop star. What they did not know was that only weeks earlier, these two people had not been speaking to each other at all. And what very few people have ever heard is what Diana actually whispered to Elton in that sacred, sorrowful moment. A detail so perfectly Diana that it tells you more about who she really was than any official portrait ever could. Elton John has spent years quietly carrying the full truth of their friendship, and what he has revealed through his memoir and interviews paints a picture of a woman the world never fully knew. By the time Elton John arrived at Windsor Castle for Prince Andrew's 21st birthday party in 1981, he was already no stranger to royal company. The Queen Mother and Princess Margaret had long been admirers of his music, and he had become a familiar face at private royal events. But nothing could have prepared him for what that particular evening would begin. Queen Elizabeth had hired Elton to perform at the party, and Lady Diana Spencer, newly engaged to Prince Charles, was in attendance at Windsor Castle when the two first crossed paths. The ballroom had a disco playing, but as Elton later described, the music was turned down so low that you could literally hear feet moving across the floor above the sound of it. It was an awkward, stiff evening full of formality, and Elton found himself doing his best to simply act normal. Then Diana walked in, and the night changed completely. Biography +2. The two immediately clicked. They ended up pretending to dance the Charleston together while laughing at the absurdity of the situation around them. In a room full of the most serious and titled people in England, these two found each other and decided the whole thing was quietly hilarious. It was a beginning that told you everything. Two people who refused to be suffocated by ceremony, finding relief in each other's laughter. Elton wrote in his autobiography that Diana was blessed with an incredible social ease, an ability to talk to anybody and to make herself seem completely ordinary despite everything around her that was anything but. For a man who had spent years performing on the world's biggest stages yet still felt like an outsider in formal settings, meeting someone with that kind of natural warmth was extraordinary. Yahoo time. As the years passed and their friendship deepened, Elton discovered that the Diana the world saw in newspapers and on television was only a fraction of the real person. He described her as fabulous company, the best dinner party guest imaginable, and said she was incredibly indiscreet and a real gossip. You could ask her anything, he said, and she would tell you. This was not the shy girl who looked up through her fringe at cameras. Behind closed doors, Diana was sharp, funny, and completely unguarded with the people she trusted. She would tease Elton about his flamboyant outfits and his oversized glasses, and he would respond by making her laugh with stories from his years on the road. Theirs was not the polished, carefully managed friendship the palace might have preferred. It was real, and it was often wonderfully irreverent. Marie Claire. Their connection ran deeper than shared humor, though. Both of them understood what it meant to be surrounded by noise and adoration while feeling profoundly alone. Diana had confided in Elton about the pressure of living under constant observation, of being expected to perform composure while carrying enormous personal pain. Elton, who was fighting his own private battles with addiction and the isolating weight of extreme fame, recognized that struggle immediately. They were two people who had been invited into the inner circle of power and celebrity, but who each felt, in their own way, that they did not entirely belong there. That shared understanding became the foundation of something rare and genuine. One evening became legendary in Elton's retelling of their friendship. He had hosted a dinner party at his home, and among the guests were two of the biggest film stars in the world, Richard Gere and Sylvester Stallone. As the evening began, something peculiar developed almost immediately. Richard Gere and Diana seemed completely taken with each other. They ended up sitting together in front of the fireplace, locked in deep conversation, as though no one else in the room existed. Elton noticed a strange atmosphere building. Judging by the look Stallone kept shooting in their direction, the blossoming connection between Gere and Diana was not going down well with him at all. The situation escalated until Elton's husband David found the two actors squaring up to each other in a hallway, preparing to trade blows. Stallone eventually stormed out, muttering that he never would have come if he had known Prince Charming was going to be there. Throughout the entire extraordinary evening, Diana remained composed, seemingly unaware that two of Hollywood's most famous tough men had nearly come to physical confrontation because of her. Elton wrote that if he was overwhelmed by Diana, it was nothing compared to the effect she had on straight men. They seemed to completely lose their minds in her presence, utterly bewitched. Biography +4. But the dimension of Diana's character that moved Elton most deeply had nothing to do with glamour or charisma. In the mid-1980s, as the AIDS crisis gripped the world in fear and misunderstanding, Diana did something that Elton and many others believe genuinely shifted public perception of the disease. She opened the first specialized HIV and AIDS unit at London's Middlesex Hospital and walked up to a patient and shook his hand without wearing gloves. In that single gesture, she changed public attitudes toward AIDS forever. The palace considered the subject too complicated and too uncomfortable for a princess to wade into. Diana did not share that view. She visited patients when cameras were not present, sat on their beds, held their hands, and listened to their stories. Elton described this as Diana's true power, not something she was necessarily trying to engineer as a statement, but a reflection of who she genuinely was. Her courage in those hospital wards directly inspired Elton to establish the Elton John AIDS Foundation, which became one of the most significant chapters of his life's work. Yahoo +2. Then came the rupture that Elton has described as one of his deepest regrets. Their friendship hit a serious breaking point over a coffee table photography book called Rock and Royalty, which Elton had put together with Gianni Versace to raise funds for his AIDS Foundation. Diana had agreed to write the foreword. Then, as publication approached, she withdrew. She told Elton she could no longer have a name associated with the project. Advisors close to the palace had raised concerns about images in the book that were considered too provocative for a member of the royal family to be linked to. Elton was deeply hurt. He felt that she was choosing the comfort of institutional approval over their friendship, and over a cause they had worked on together. He made his feelings known, and the response he received was, by his own account, formal and cold. Not the letter of a friend, but the letter of a princess closing a door. For months, two of the most recognizable people on earth did not speak a single word to one another. Biographer Marie Claire. The silence broke in the most sorrowful of circumstances. In July 1997, the fashion designer Gianni Versace was murdered outside his home in Miami. He had been a close friend to both of them. Elton was at his home in the south of France when Diana called him from a boat in the Mediterranean, where she was vacationing with Dodi Fade. She asked how he was, whether he had spoken to Donatella Versace, and then she said sorry. She told him that argument had been silly, that life was too short. Just like that, the silence was over. They traveled to Milan together for the funeral at the great cathedral, and it was there that the famous photograph was taken. What the world saw as a tender moment of royal compassion had, as Elton later revealed, a very Diana-shaped twist. While she leaned in close to comfort him in his grief, she quietly asked if he happened to have a mint on him because she was desperate for a polo. It was exactly the kind of remark that had made him love her in the first place, the ability to find a sliver of warmth and humor even in the heaviest of moments. They walked out of that cathedral together with plans to have lunch very soon. Neither of them could have imagined it would be the last time they would see each other. Marie Claire biography. On August 31st, 1997, Elton was woken at his home in Nice by the sound of his fax machine. A friend had sent a note saying they were so sorry to hear the awful news. Confused, he turned on the television and saw images of a crushed car in a Paris tunnel. Diana had been killed in a crash while being pursued by photographers. She was 36 years old. Elton has described the shock as total and disorienting. Only 6 weeks earlier, they had been sitting together in Milan, laughing and talking about the future. Now she was gone, and the months of silence they had allowed to stretch between them over a book felt like an unbearable waste of time he could never recover. Biography. It was Sir Richard Branson, with the blessing of the Spencer family, who approached Elton about performing a tribute at the funeral. He suggested rewriting the 1973 song Candle in the Wind, which Elton had originally written with lyricist Bernie Taupin about Marilyn Monroe. The opening word would change to Goodbye England's Rose, may you ever grow in our hearts. The royal family initially resisted the idea of Elton performing, but the Dean of Westminster successfully argued that the tribute would be an imaginative and generous gesture to a public that had grown deeply alienated from the institution in the days following Diana's death. Elton was terrified. He placed a teleprompter near his piano because he was so afraid of accidentally reverting to the original lyrics. He has said in interviews that performing those 4 minutes felt simultaneously like the largest and most selfless thing he had ever done. He was not there as Elton John the performer, but as a friend saying goodbye in the only language he fully knew. He managed to finish the song without a single mistake and quietly returned to his seat. Smooth Radio +3. The song was released as a single and became the biggest-selling record in UK and US chart history, eventually selling over 33 million copies globally, with L proceeds going to Diana's Memorial Fund. Yet Elton took no joy in its commercial success. He told people he never wanted to hear the song played on the radio. To him, it was not a hit. It was a memory of the saddest day of his life, and playing for entertainment felt wrong to him entirely. He made a personal rule that he would never perform that version of the song again unless Diana's son specifically asked him to. Time. In the years that followed, Elton kept the promise he had quietly made to himself while watching William and Harry walk behind their mother's coffin. He has spoken openly about how painful it was to see those two young boys, aged 15 and 12, carrying their grief in front of the entire world. He became a steady presence in their lives, not a distant famous figure, but someone who offered his homes as safe spaces where they could simply be young men away from the cameras. When Prince Harry and Meghan faced sustained press attention that Elton felt mirrored the treatment Diana had endured, he stated publicly that he felt a profound sense of duty to protect Harry and his family from the kind of intrusive scrutiny that had contributed to Diana's death. He arranged for private flights to give them safe passage to his home in France, and he used his own platform to defend them at personal cost to his relationships with sections of the British media establishment. What Elton John ultimately confesses, drawn from everything he has written and said in the years since 1997, is that the Diana the world constructed was both true and incomplete. She was genuinely warm, genuinely compassionate, and genuinely brave in ways that changed how society treated vulnerable people. But she was also funny in a way that could catch you completely off guard, stubborn enough to let a friendship go cold for months over wounded pride, and human enough to open a cold to an old friend she had hurt by simply saying she was sorry. She possessed an incredible social ease and an ability to make anyone feel completely comfortable in her company. That was real. And so was a woman who, sitting in a cathedral in Milan mourning a murdered friend, quietly asked the grieving man beside her if he had a mint. Marie Claire. Elton has said that one of his most persistent regrets is the time they lost to silence. He has told people repeatedly that life is far too short to let pride outlast love, and that he wishes he had simply picked up the phone in 1996 instead of waiting for an apology that nearly never came. He learned, too late and too sharply, that even the most extraordinary friendships are fragile and need tending. The lesson he shares now is disarmingly simple. Say what you mean to the people you love before the fax machine delivers news you were never prepared to receive. Sources: Elton John's 2019 autobiography, Me. Craig Brown of Voyage Around the Queen. Reporting from Time, Biography.com, People, and Marie Claire, based on Elton John's direct accounts.